Hello, participants. Welcome to the module on task based language teaching. I am Madhvi Gayatri Raman, and today we are going to discuss what we mean by task based language teaching. In this module, we will look at the history of TBLT, as it is called, and how we can use it to make language learning more meaningful and fun. We will also look at how we can do this without stretching ourselves too much. That is, by modifying some of the exercises or activities in the textbook. But before we begin, let's take a quick look at what you will be able to do after going through this module. The concept of task based language teaching and learning will be clearer to you. We will also learn the main features of tasks. We will look at the criteria for identifying tasks, and finally, the steps to create and implement an integrated task based lesson. I have with me today two of my colleagues, Dr. Vijaya from the English and Foreign Languages University and Dr. Amit Kumar from Geetham University. Welcome, Vijaya and Amit, to the program. Let's begin by doing something together. Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
So, you are colleagues and are planning to go out for lunch. You have to choose a restaurant, keeping in mind the cuisine, the dietary restrictions, price of food, which is very important, and the location. Share your choice with your colleague and discuss with each other and arrive at a choice of restaurant. Can you do that, please?
Sure.
So, Amit, do you feel like going out for dinner tonight?
Yes, of course, ma'am.
Where do you think we should go?
It depends on our preference. What would you like to prefer? Vegetarian or non-vegetarian?
I think I'd like to have non-vegetarian today.
Oh, same here. I also like to have the same. So, where should we go?
Let's go to Taj Banjara.
Oh, that's way too expensive, it seems.
Okay, so if that's too expensive, maybe we could go with Garden Restaurant,
Yes, that's a good idea.
and that's reasonable as well.
Yes, absolutely.
I think Garden is the right choice.
Sure. Yes, let's go to garden then.
So we'll take an auto and go to Paradise.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. If I could just ask the two of you to look at what you did for a minute, could you tell me the kind of phrases you used and why you used these phrases?
We wanted to state our preferences,
Okay.
seek some information, and make some suggestions.
Right. Do you think this choice of language would change if you had a senior colleague or your principal with you in the group? Vijaya, what do you think?
Definitely, I think it would become more formal. In fact, one of the things I do when I teach something like this, use a role play in class, is that I try to get the students to think of various versions. So, for example, do you feel like eating? Who would you say that with? Would you say that with a colleague? Would you say that with your boss? You wouldn't say something like that if you're talking to your boss.
Definitely not. Hey, why don't we?
Yeah, we wouldn't use something as informal as that. So I get them to not just think about it. Sometimes I also have this habit of putting it up on the board and different versions of the same sentence utterance and the formal and the informal versions. So something like, that's way too expensive, or don't you think that's rather expensive?
Yeah, so I think that would give them a variety of structures to look at and the various situations in which they would be using each of these structures. All right, so let's move to the next bit then. So, what are the main features of a task? Well, language is used primarily for meaning making. The task is related, as you have seen, to a real life situation. It involves a two-way exchange of information or maybe even multi participant exchange of information. The participants work towards achieving a common goal. Participants are engaged in a discussion and exchange of ideas, and many outcomes are possible. So, this is something we must be aware of, that participants have to engage in a negotiation to arrive at a solution. And the kind of language used changes depending on whom we are interacting with.
All right. So, how would we define the task, ma'am?
That's a bit of a question, but I think some of the main features or a definition of task that many of us are now agreed upon is that a task is something that learners do or carry out using the language resources that they have, or with language provided to them in pre task work. It has an outcome that is not linked to language learning, and they may acquire the language as they carry out the task. It is relevant to the learner's needs. It involves a focus on meaning, and it requires the use of communication strategies and interactional skills when two or more learners are involved. It also means opportunities are provided for learners to reflect on their language use.
So, Gayatri, could we talk a little about the overlap with other kinds of systems that we've read about? So, do you think TBLT shares some features with experiential learning?
Definitely. In fact, Vijay, TBLT draws heavily on the concept of experiential learning, and it shares certain features with it, such as the transformation of knowledge within the learner rather than transmission of knowledge from the teacher. The learner is an active participant in small collaborative groups. There is a holistic attitude towards the subject matter and an emphasis on the process of learning rather than the product of learning. So, you have an emphasis on learning how to learn, self inquiry, social communication skills. Learning is self directed, the motivation is intrinsic. I'm sure learners and participants, you will have come across this in the module on experiential language learning as well.
Okay, so is this TBLT a new approach? Or didn't Dr. Prabhu introduce this?
Yes, Amit, you're right. TBLT actually began in India in 1979 when Dr. Prabhu introduced this approach, secondary classrooms, in what is known as the Bangalore Project, and I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yes.
It emerged from a dissatisfaction with more traditional methods of language teaching, where the emphasis was on grammar and vocabulary. So learners knew the rules of the language, but they were unable to use it to communicate effectively. And researchers began to question the centrality of grammar in language teaching and learning, and instead began to reflect on how people learnt their own languages in order to achieve a wide range of communicative purposes, such as making requests, giving advice, making suggestions, etc., as you did in the role play that you did just a while ago. You must have read about this discussion in the module on how languages are learnt. This shift from grammatical competence to communicative competence led to the communicative language teaching or CLT approach in the 1970s, with its emphasis on communication in social contexts.
So, Gayatri, if I may come in at this point, so historically, so first CLT came, and then after that, chronologically, TBLT is a more recent approach. Uh, so CLT had very little space for grammar teaching. There aren't too many discussions of grammar teaching in CLT. So, what is the stance of TBLT practitioners towards grammar teaching?
Okay, so you've touched upon quite an important part, and I think it's even more relevant to teachers in our context because we've taught so much of grammar, and then to be told that we shouldn't teach grammar at all. I think we need to go back, like you said, in history. In the initial days, CLT began by doing away with grammar altogether. Later on, however, practitioners and researchers realized that some focus on form was required for learners to develop a relatively high level of linguistic and social linguistic competence. Very often we find that learners may have limited capacity to process the target language, and they find it difficult to attend on meaning and form simultaneously. In such situations, when performing a communicative activity, learners often prioritize meaning over form, and therefore it becomes necessary to draw their attention to form. But it's important to do this, I think, within the framework of a communicative task. So, using tasks helps learners to focus on form, meaning, and use. And in this way, language learning becomes relevant, it becomes meaningful, useful, and it's fun. So, I think we now understand that we do need to teach grammar, but not grammar as grammar in isolation or structures in isolation, but grammar within the context of real world language use.
So, yeah, thank you so much for defining the task and making us understand the nature of the task. But sometimes it happens with the teachers that we cannot understand whether an exercise or an activity in available in the textbook is really a task.
Yes. So, how do you find out whether
Right.
it's a task or an exercise masquerading as a task? Let's just go back to the role play that we did a short while ago and try and answer these questions. So, I'm going to ask you these questions, or perhaps you can look at them yourselves. So, will an activity like the one that we did, interest the learners? What do you think?
Definitely. In fact, it's something that I've tried in my classes. In fact, with one particular batch, they had a setup of a restaurant.
Oh,
So
oh, that's coincidental. Yeah.
right, so they got so excited about the activity that they went to the extent of designing the menu, doing the graphics, and they did the entire setup in class. And they had two kinds of scripts. In one script, they had a bearer and two customers, and the bearer was not a very friendly bearer.
Okay.
And in the second script, the bearer was flirtatious. So we had a lot
Okay.
of fun. And so the takeaway, as shared by the students, was that it makes them aware of language use. It gives them various options, makes them aware of a lot of vocabulary in the formal and informal context, which otherwise, though, they have no way of encountering.
Right. So, your answer to the first question is a resounding yes, I can see. So, is there a primary focus on meaning? That's the second part. And I think to some extent you've answered that because they're looking at language in order to convey meaning. What do you think, Amit?
Yes, there are multiple purposes of activities in the classroom. Uh, and apart from meaning, we also define the functions, the various functions we use in our day-to-day life.
True. So, is there a goal or an outcome? If you looked at your own little activity, was there a goal or an outcome that had to be achieved? The one that you
Yes.
enacted?
Yeah, so if I could pick on what Amit said before answering your question, I think one of the things that I use role plays for is to make the students aware of different language functions.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the role play that you gave us, you wanted us to state an opinion
Yeah.
and to express different kinds of functions. So I think it's a fantastic way of introducing them to functions. And as far as goal or outcome is concerned, I think that's the goal is discoursal
Yeah,
and a real life transaction.
exactly. So there is always something that you want to do with the language, right? You were negotiating to arrive at a restaurant that both of you could go to, and it's not too expensive. So there is something that we are looking to do with this language, and these are things that we do in our real life, not just in the classroom. Is success judged in terms of an outcome? So you've already mentioned that, and you've said yes, there is a certain amount of success because you've negotiated and arrived at an agreeable solution, so to speak. The other question is completion a priority? What is your take on that?
Yeah, well, I would think only partially
Okay.
because the emphasis is in the process And post CLT, the emphasis in language teaching has been more on process. And if you think of your process and product writing as well, the emphasis in writing also nowadays
So
is
process.
on the process.
Yes, so I think getting learners to engage with the language and use it, whether they actually complete the task or not, is the more important thing. And I think going back to Prabhu, he says at least if 50% of the task is completed, you've done something with language. Finally, does the task or the activity relate to the real world? And
Absolutely.
yes. So if you have activities that are restaurant related or filling forms or things like that, even letter writing, I think very often it becomes very stilted, but it can be actually made more real world and relevant to our learners. So yeah, so since I think we've had more yeses than a partial yes or a no, these are the chief characteristics or the ways of looking at a task and saying, okay, if these criteria are fulfilled, then yes, this is a task and it's not an activity. So, or an exercise. So I hope, Amit, I've answered
Oh yes, ma'am.
that question.
Yes, definitely. We have understood the significance of the task in the language classroom, and we all practice it in
I know.
our
Yeah.
classroom. So, I would like to know from you, or if you could share with us some of the tasks which you use in the classroom for
Okay.
language development.
Okay, so there are different kinds of tasks that you can use in the classroom, and they go by different names. But I think one of the groupings that I use, to kind of put them down. So the first would be a listing or a brainstorming kind of activity, and as an example, you could say, ask your students to list places that they'd like to visit, and for each of these places, perhaps put down a reason and then exchange those and come and arrive at a consensus. And you can see the discussion so far has been either on food or travel, so these are things that I like. The other kind of task is an ordering task or a sequencing task, where you jumble pictures or jumble paragraphs of a story and ask them to sequence it out and then give you the rationale for choosing that sequence. The third would be the matching task. This is quite a popular variety where you match titles and headlines to paragraphs or longer texts, or you can match paragraphs to pictures. That is another possibility. The fourth kind is comparisons, where you have pictures and you do a spot the difference, something that we've been doing from childhood.
Yes.
Problem solving of the kind that you did, or even finding solutions to problems like waste segregation, for instance. So, students could list the ways in which it can be done, the advantages and disadvantages of doing so, finding economically viable solutions. So, all of this requires them to actually engage with language, discuss with one another in either pairs or groups, and arrive at consensus. And think about these things. The last that I would think of is storytelling or sharing experiences. And this is something that you can really use and exploit in the classroom because students love to not only listen to teachers talk about their own experiences, but also recount their personal experiences. And narrating stories gives them this opportunity to produce language in a more sustained manner. And because the topic that they are talking about is familiar to them, it becomes more interesting and they are more involved. So, as I said earlier, these task types are also known as information gap, reasoning gap activities, opinion gap activities, jigsaw tasks, problem solving, decision making, opinion exchange tasks. So, wherever you see these different names, they're all, you know, one and the same. They belong to one of these six kinds of tasks.
So, in a way, this would be a kind of an overlap with problem solving and what we read when we read with N.S. Prabhu.
Yes,
It's to
yes,
leave a
definitely.
gap. That the point is to leave a gap, which is to be filled which will lead to real life interaction.
Yes, and because they are trying to bridge that gap, they're going to be using language. And it can be whatever language they have with them. So it doesn't matter, in my opinion, if these are phrases, complete sentences, they can use. The idea is to get them to use that language. And later on, when we look at the stages of the task based lesson, we will see how the teacher can use the post task phase to actually help bridge these gaps, bring it to their notice, and give them feedback on what needs to go in, whether it's vocabulary or grammar. So we'll look at that a little later. But thanks for anticipating that. So, this then brings us to the end of the first part of this module on task based language learning. Let me quickly go over what we have done today. We began by doing a little role play and then arrived at the features of a task. We defined what we mean by a task. We also looked at the connection between TBLT, experiential learning, CLT, and the notion of communicative competence. We discussed the need for and the place of grammar teaching in TBLT. And finally, we listed some of the criteria that can help us identify whether a task is really a task, in addition to the different types of tasks that we can use in the classroom. Thank you, Vijaya and Amit, for joining me here today and contributing to the discussion.
Thank
Thank you
you
so
for
much.
having us over.
Thank you, and thank you, participants.